Sad day for Britain and the world. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher dead at 87. Joining us to discuss her legacy, Matthias Matthijs, author of Ideas and Economic Crisis in Britain, and he's also a professor of international and political economy at Johns Hopkins. He joins us now from our bureau in Washington. Matthias, thank you very much for being there.
Pleasure.
So it is a sad day. Your book is about crisis, and in doing that book, you talk to a lot of cabinet people who knew her in the UK very closely: Nigel Lawson, Cecil Parkinson, Norman Tebbit, Geoffrey Howe. Was Britain truly in a crisis when she took over?
Well, yes and no, and I think that's an important lesson of her tenacity and her capacity to narrate a crisis, right? When she came to power in May 1979, Britain had just had what was called the Winter of Discontent. She managed to convince that her version of those events was the right one and that Britain needed to dramatically change, right? There had been a much deeper crisis in Britain in 73, 74, which hadn't led to any major changes. I mean, it led to the end of Edward Heath and to the incoming of a Labour government. But 5 years later, I think Margaret Thatcher was able to convince, at least 40% of the British electorate that kind of a dramatic overhaul of the British state was what was needed, right? And so she did actually not waste a crisis. It was a small crisis, not a large crisis when she came to power.
And in fact, Britain did undergo massive changes. I grew up in Britain during that time, and there were huge changes, including an overhaul of the entire coal mining industry and financial services. Was Britain ripe for someone like her to come along and let that happen, or was she truly a force of nature who could just come along and make changes for the better?
Yeah, I think it's a combination for both of both. Obviously, the British system did allow a party with 40% of the vote to get something close to 2/3 of all the seats in the House of Commons. And there's quite a lot you can get done that way. But don't forget, she had a lot of dissenters at the beginning, right? They were a minority of the party, but she was the first woman leader of a conservative party. Labour wasn't quite there yet, and neither were other parties. But in that sense, she, I think, used the circumstances quite well. I think what a lot of people have forgotten is also how cautious she was with, you mentioned the miners. She didn't touch the miners for the first 4 or 5 years of her office because she knew that they could, basically block Britain completely, especially in a winter. So she built up the coal stocks, which is something Nigel Lawson helped her with as Energy Secretary from 81 to 83. And so she did very carefully prepare for this change, already starting in 1975 when she became the opposition leader for the Conservative Party.
Now, will we see other people like Margaret Thatcher emerge in Britain and elsewhere? Will we see other female premiers? We haven't seen another one in Britain since she's been there, and people acknowledge she was great.
Yeah, there's other figures like her. Ronald Reagan certainly comes to mind in the United States. When he was trying to run for president in 76, his ideas were seen as too radical. I think Thatcher helped change the tone and the terms of the economic debate in Britain, helped to change it in the US, which made Ronald Reagan right now seem quite mainstream, right? But other people, Clem Attlee in 45, who beat Churchill, was a similar leader who changed the terms of the debate, and of course Franklin Roosevelt did. Well, the jury is still out whether Barack Obama is such a leader in the United States, but he certainly had the crisis. But it's not clear that his policies so far have been that radical that they've, created a new kind of settlement. I don't know whether Britain will get another leader like her in the near future, because, for all her accomplishments, I think a large consensus now feels that it was all her reforms, all her overhaul of the British state came at quite a significant cost. Very high unemployment, widening income inequality, and also the social fabric, right, of many of these northern British towns that were completely shut down, right? When unemployment shot up and mines were closed and so on. And also the country is divided, right? I mean, London and the south and the southeast have done very well. Other parts of the country haven't done so well. So I don't know if that many leaders or even women especially would see her as an example to follow in this current era. I think and that's where Obama is interesting. Obama did admire, I think, somebody like Thatcher's kind of audacity, in a way that they saw a system that they thought was fundamentally flawed. There were conviction politicians, ideas politicians that could change the consensus. And I think that is appealing to both left and right, of a person that was able to do that.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time there. That's Matthias Matthijs. He's an Ideas and Economic Crisis in Britain author. We appreciate your time, sir.